give him traveling mercies. And I don't know, are you taking your wife with you, brother?
No, she's going to ladies retreat.
Oh, okay. So she'll be back playing the piano. That's what I'm concerned about.
We'll be here Sunday.
Okay. All right. Well, pray for him as he travels, and that the Lord would bless him. Pray for the ladies. Thanks for reminding me. I think Bella's going, and several ladies are going down to Philadelphia Baptist in Alabama. And so pray the Lord would bless them. I understand they're taking a big vehicle. And I don't know Sister Debbie driving. And I don't know how much experience she has driving that big vehicle. Pray for them as they go. But I'm sure the Lord will take care of them. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. And Brother Steve, would you open the service for us?
Most gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for the services today. We thank you for the message this morning. Very convicting, Lord. Just help us to examine our hearts. You are the pastors who bring the word again. This afternoon, pray that you speak to them, speak to our hearts and minds. Pray for those that will be traveling this coming week. For Jerry and Sister Louise, bless them. For our pastors, Nancy Georgia, and the ladies in Alabama. And we just bless each of their meeting. And we guide our families, so we pray especially for those in our families that are yet lost. We pray for the churches in this area, as Brother Jerry mentioned, pastors. I pray that you would be with Brother Deacon and his wife as they're traveling as well. And that God save them. Bless the services, Lord. Guide us through this day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. I thought we'd sing one song this afternoon, number 43, I Shall Not Be Moved. And for me, it's the equivalent of two songs, so we'll just sing this one. Jesus is my Savior, I shall not be moved. In his love and favor, I shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the waters, Lord, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters, Lord, I shall not be moved. In my Christ abiding, I shall not be moved. In his love I'm hiding, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. Lord, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. Lord, I shall not be moved. If I trust him ever, I shall not be moved. He will fail me never. I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. Lord, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. Lord, I shall not be moved. On his word I'm feeding, I shall not be moved. He's the one that's leading, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. Lord, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. Lord, I shall not be moved. Amen. All right. All right. We're in our study of 1 Samuel, come to the chapter that most people know more about than anything in the Bible, and it's the battle of David and Goliath. And so, chapter 17, verse 11, we see that Goliath has come out and been presenting himself this challenge to Israel for a one-on-one fight. And so he does this over and over to the army of the Israelites. And so in verse 11 it says, "And when Saul and all Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And the man went among them from an old man in the days of Saul," meaning David's father basically was too old to go to battle, so he didn't meet with Saul. But his sons, his 3 oldest sons, were old enough to go and fight. And David, who was probably a young man, stayed with the sheep. And it tells us, verse 13, and the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to battle, and the names of his 3 sons that went to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Now David was there playing music in Saul's palace, and from all we can tell, he was just out there. He was just a man playing music. Saul really didn't even know who he was. He just liked how good he could play. And so he had seen David before playing music, but he really didn't know him. And so David, when this battle took place and they were staying out there in battle, he went back home. He wasn't staying there in the palace. He went back home to take care of the sheep. And in verse 16 it says, "And the Philistine, who we know was Goliath, drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. Day after day, they would get ready for battle. They would go down there and they'd have their trenches and they would be ready, and they would probably be living there in one side of the valley and the other side of the valley, and they're eating, and every day they would shout and holler and prepare for battle." It's interesting, if you ever watched, what was that, Mel Gibson in that movie where he was playing whatever it was over in Scotland, and how they would all yell and scream at the other, almost, say, "Yeah, we're going to kill you. We're going to give your heads to the birds," or whatever. And they did that kind of thing. A lot of that was to rally the troops and fire them up and get them ready to, and they did this every day. And when they would do this, Goliath would come out and just kind of dishearten them, because they were really, as an army, they were ready to fight another army. But when this 11-foot or whatever he was, 9.5, 10-foot, would walk out there and just say, "Send a man to fight me," when he would come out, they'd run back. They were scared to death of this man, and who wouldn't be? I mean, you see him walking out, you don't want to be the one in the front that he comes to first. So you're just going to go, I'm backing away. And he was making a mockery of the God's army. And so we see this is going on for 40 days. So Jesse doesn't know. It's not like he can FaceTime or text or get a message, and getting a message back from this might have been difficult. And so what does he do? He's worried. He's a normal father. He's worried about his sons, worried that they might be injured or killed, and I can't imagine what that's like, And sometimes in my rashness, I've even thought, it may be good for one of my grandkids to go in the military,
to teach them a lesson of life, But then I think, you know what? They could be over there in harm's way. A lot of people, get these, the ones that have died in this skirmish with Iran weren't even in really a forefront of a battle. They were just, some of them on a plane that crashed, a refueling plane. Things happen. And so here's a father that's worried about his sons. And so in verse 17 it says, "And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren." So he says, take this food. He knows that 40 days, they may be running low on some food. How well equipped was this army to go out there and have just sitting around waiting? Well, you talk about all these ships over there in the Gulf. These ships that have been sitting there stranded, they run low on fuel, they run low on fresh water, they run low on food, and that's created a problem for just these merchant ships that are just stranded there all these 2 months. Well, there's 40 days, you got an army that doesn't have, they can't go out in the field and just pick their food. They may be able to kill an animal, but their rations could be getting very lean. And so Dad's saying, you know what, take some food to your brother, see how they're doing, and get a promise from them, get a pledge from them. And then he says this in verse 18, "And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000. So they were part of a 1,000 troop, what do you want to call it, battalion or whatever, that there was a captain over. And he says, take your brother some food, but also give these 10 cheeses to the captain, that he may distribute them. When it says cheeses, it's probably not little cheese sticks like I get out of the refrigerator. Probably like a cheese thing like this, like this. If you ever seen them things that they make like that, they're cheese wheels. You go to Wisconsin and you'll see cheese wheels like that. And so he said, take these, 10 of these. You start cutting that up, you could feed 1,000 men a chunk of cheese very easily. And so there's a lot of protein, nourishment. So he says, take them to the captain. So he's prepared to know, he wants to no doubt also find out, and he cares about the army, he cares about other men, he cares about certainly his sons. And he says, and take their pledge. See how your brethren are doing, and get a promise from them that they're okay, and that they'll be okay. And now Saul, when they and all the men of Israel that were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines, they hadn't really actually had a fight, they were preparing to fight. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper and went as Jesse had commanded him. He came to the trench as the host was going forth to fight. They were ready to go every day. They would be ready to go out and fight, and shouted for the battle. He's there early, and he's just there early in the morning, and they're all, it's going to go to war today. Maybe we'll actually have a battle today, and the Philistines will come out. And for Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array against the army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage and ran into the army and came and saluted his brethren. He found in this group of 1,000 men, he finds out where his brethren are, and he comes up and goes, how you guys doing? Comes up and sees his brothers. And so he leaves his hand in the carriage there, and he comes and does it. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistine, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. They're all ready for battle. He's talking with his brothers, and here comes this guy, plodding out. All 1,000 pounds of him, 500 to 600 pounds of armor. He's not running. He's got a guy in front of him carrying this big shield. It's probably bigger than the guy that's carrying it. And he's walking out, and here's this massive man clanging out, just huge. Just the sight of this would just be incredible. With all this armor on, with a spear taller than he is, with a spearhead that's just a massive size. It's just an incredible sight. And he comes out and says the same thing. I challenge a man. And he defies the army. And so David hears this. And he spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. Now there was some that was out there. They were their first wave out there that's ready to fight. That, they're shouting and saying, come on out, we're ready. And Goliath comes out. What do? They ran. They ran. They fled. They went back to the trenches. And the men of Israel said to David that are talking with him, have you seen this man that has come up, surely to defy Israel? In verse 25, he has come up, and it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make him his father's house free in Israel. So, I mean, Saul was putting quite an offering out there. And, you know, these men are saying, you know what, if someone goes out there and kills that guy, any man goes out there and kills that guy, they're going to be filthy rich. They're going to have great riches. They're going to be able to marry his daughter. They're going to be part of the king's household. Not only that, they're going to be free. And that word free, when we think about it, is a lot more than what we can even understand. Because it really meant that they were free of any kind of taxes. They were never going to be enslaved. You know, even Hebrews were slaves. They would never be in servitude to the king. You know, the king could take anybody. That was part of what, you know, what Samuel made them understand. He can take your daughters, he can take your sons, he can take everything. He can take some of your food, he can take your crops, he can take your land. And what Saul was saying is, he'll be free from all of that. His family will be free from all of that. That would be something, wouldn't it? If you would just think, you know what, can you imagine if you never had to pay income tax again, if you never had to pay property tax again, if you never had to pay tax on a car, if you never had to pay tax on your property, you never pay tax on anything, and you can just go like this to the Iowa government, you know. I don't have to pay tax. We'd be happy with that, wouldn't we? But then if you were to have the wealth of Jeff Bezos or the wealth of one of those and be married to the most beautiful, powerful family in the world, and that's what was being offered. And David heard that. And so he hears these men telling them that. And so these soldiers see Goliath, and there's none brave enough. They run back to safety, including, you know, Jesse's sons. They're afraid. They're not willing to go out. In verse 26, and David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach of Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after the manner, saying, so shall it be done unto the man that killeth him. And they were repeating what was being said. Now you remember too that when David was anointed by Samuel, there was a private anointing, and only the family was there. And as he started first to find out which one of Jesse's sons, he started with the eldest, didn't he? And so the first three that came were the first three that are mentioned here. And no doubt, even that's what obviously Jesse and obviously Samuel thought, well, certainly it's the oldest, the most experienced. Look at the size of this man. Look at how handsome he is. Look how smart he is. That's Eliab, right? And Eliab's the one that's probably got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And when he sees David show up, he rebukes him for even coming. Instead of just being thankful and saying, thanks for bringing the food, you need to get on home, you know, you need to get back, take care of Dad, take care of things. No, look what he says. And Eliab, the eldest, verse 28, brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why camest thou down thither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and thy naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. He talks to him like he's 8 or 10 years old. He's not. I really believe that as I read through some of what people point out, that Scripture really points out that he was probably 18 to 20 years old. He was a young man. He wasn't this little boy that only a boy named David, you know, we make him into like he's 12 or 10. No, he was a young man. But he tells him there, I know your pride. I know that you've been anointed. I know what's in your heart. I know you think you're going to be king. I know that's why you're here, that you might see the battle. And David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? And as he turned from him toward another, he's listening to his oldest brother, and now after he says that to him, he turns and speaks to someone else, another person. and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner, and said, Look, you go on and down and fight him, because if you fight him and you beat this guy, you're going to get, your whole family's going to be free, you're going to be wealthy, you're going to marry Saul's daughter, be part of the king's family. And then it says, and when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul. You know what? Somebody went and said, you know what? There's a young man down here that just doesn't understand why. And he says he's willing to go out and fight him. You know, they go and say that. So David said it to Saul. They bring him and sent for him. And so David's now front and center with Saul. He said, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul, who is no doubt probably a man in his mid-40s, and Saul was taller than most men in Israel, and being that he was the king, he should have been the one that willing to go down there and face Goliath. But Saul said unto David, he says, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth. It doesn't mean he was a kid. And he a man of war from his youth. So obviously he's saying Goliath fought as a youth, but he's been fighting since he was a youth, and you're a beginner. And there's common wisdom here. There's a little bit of common wisdom that an older man might look at someone that's very young. I always look back at my wife and I think people probably looked at us and thought, they are crazy for getting married at 18 years old, both of them. You know, me, a skinny-looking little wimp of a guy, you know, and they probably thought, he can't even take care of himself. Good stiff wind's going to blow him away, and he thinks he's going to take care of her. You know, I only weighed 135 pounds, 6 foot tall, 135 pounds, maybe that short of 6 foot tall. But that was nothing to me. But I was 18, getting married. And so I look at this and I think that's kind of what, you know how David is described? A stripling. And that's probably how you would have described me. I didn't look like Caleb. I didn't look like that. I didn't have any muscle. I had nothing. I mean, I was just skinny and nothing but bones, skin and bones. And you look at me and you say, what happened to you now? That's what happened to me. Good cook. Good cook. But in verse 56, skip down, the king said, inquire whose son this stripling is. Isn't it interesting how he described him? Whose son this stripling is. In verse 18, we go back and in chapter 16, verse 18, to see how David is described. I want to bring you back and say this. He's not described as a boy. One of the servants in chapter 16, verse 8, answered one of the servants and said, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite that is cunning in playing, because he said he can come and play good music, and a mighty valiant man, a man of war and prudent in matters. So certainly at some point in time he had seen him fight in some battle. He was a young man, and he says he's not afraid of anything. But he calls him a man, not a boy, not a youth. And so I think that those who study a lot, I agree with them, that he was probably 18 to 20 years old, but he was yet to be filled out. And I always thought it was funny because I was so skinny, I look back at wedding pictures, I look back and I go, man, there was nothing to you. You know, I don't even know if I go into get a tux, you got a size 24 waist? I don't even know what I wore, but I was skinny. But I remember just about 3 or 4 years into marriage, I look back at pictures and I go, man, did you plump up? Not fat. I got a lot of muscle. By the time I was 22 to 23 years old, I was happy because the first time in my life I went, something there, you know. It's gone now, but I had it for a while. But I was still a stripling for a few years there. And I think that's what David was. He was a stripling. And so in verse 34 of chapter 17, David said unto Saul, thy servant kept thy father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And it didn't happen at the same time. It wasn't like one lion and one bear fighting over a lamb. It's two different circumstances. You know, a lion at one time grabbed a bear, and another time, grabbed a lamb, and another time a bear grabbed a lamb. And look at how would he kill him? Now, you understand, all he has is what he takes out to battle today, a staff and a sling. And so, literally, it tells us that he grabbed hold of these animals. Look at verse 35. And I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. There's a wonderful picture of salvation there, because we're in the mouth of, many times Satan's got us in his mouth. And there's a picture of us being delivered. But he says, I delivered him out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. I mean, I look at this and I'm thinking, what did he use? I think he used his bare hands. And when it came down to a lion or a bear, he grabbed that animal, saved the lamb out of its jaws, out of its paws, out of its hands, out of its mouth. And then the animal turned against David. And David, with his bare hands, killed a lion and killed a bear. And so, and he says, thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. In other words, I'll kill him too. And he compares Goliath to that of an animal. He's basically saying, that uncircumcised Philistine is going to be just like a lion and a bear were in my hands. They'll be slain, they'll be left for dead, because he's mocked the armies of God. He likened him to have no mercy, as he had no mercy on the lion or the bear. He says, moreover, in verse 17, the Lord that delivered me, he gives God the credit. He doesn't say by my strength or my power. The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go. I tell you what, that was quite the statement, because you realize you're telling this skinny stripling to go out and fight this giant, and you pretty much know he's going to lose, right? Then that means you're going to all be slaves and servants too. So somewhere here, Saul looked at that, and because of David's great faith, he said, go, and the Lord be with thee. First of all, he knew the Lord wasn't with him anymore. The Lord wasn't speaking to him. And he saw the faith of someone else, and saw the faith of God in him. He gave God the credit for saving him out of the lion and the bear, and he says, God will deliver this person to me out of my hand also, into my hands. And David gave God the credit, and so Saul says, go. And look at verse 38. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. He also armed him with a coat of mail. And some think that the way that this reads is that Saul gave an order and said, give this man a helmet, give this man a coat of mail, give this man a sword, give this man... I don't think so. I think it was here. 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 First of all, I think Saul knew that he wasn't equipped to fight. He wasn't ready to fight. He wasn't able to fight. Probably wasn't even going to go fight. But he took his armor. I think it's his own armor. Because of what it says here, look what it says in verse 39. And David girded not a sword, his sword, Saul's sword, upon his armor. And he essayed to go. He was going to go. He had it all on, and he thought, okay, I got all this on. And then he thought, I don't need it. He hadn't used it before. He hadn't proved it. He hadn't fought with it. You know, even Saul's armor probably weighed, I was seeing something in that museum. Did you see the bomb suit in there? You know how much it weighed? They have these bomb suits that, police wear when they're going to de-arm a bomb or whatever. I think it weighed 120 pounds. I thought, I may be wrong. It was a lot of weight. My wife read it to me, you know. But, I mean, you think about if you weigh 200 pounds and you put on over 100 pounds of a suit, you're not going to be able to move very good, especially if you haven't ever had it on before, to go out and do something. David, who probably maybe weighed 135 pounds, now has 75 pounds or 100 pounds of armor on. And is thinking, how am I going to go out and fight with this? And so he said, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off. He'd never fought with these things. He hadn't tested them. He wasn't skillful with them. And so in verse 40 it says he took his staff, his shepherd's staff, in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones out of a brook and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a script, and his sling in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. You have to imagine this. This guy for 40 days has been challenging a man to come out and fight. And here comes this skinny guy wearing his work clothing that he would go to the field and watch sheep in, probably no more than a tunic, with a stick, maybe a stick in this hand if he's right-handed, and a sling and a little purse bag, walking out. And here's Goliath out there with all his armor. He's insulted. Because what would a shepherd do with a stick? You know, maybe a dog gets a little too close to the sheep. You hit him with the stick. You throw a rock at a dog. And that's what he thinks, you know, an animal, a wolf or something that gets near the sheep. So he does this and looks at Goliath, looks and he says, and then Philistine came and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield that went before him, and this giant of a man walking out there, and David showing up like he shows up, and the Philistine looked about and saw David, and he disdained him, for he was but a youth. Again, I think a young man, ruddy, fair countenance, probably didn't even have to shave yet. You know, a lot of young men get to be 18 to 20 years old, they can't grow a beard yet. Makes them mad, I know it does, you know, because I was there. But you get to the, you know, he's still growing up. Fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves, with a stick? That you come to me, you're going to treat me like a dog and just hit me with a stick and say, scooch, 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 go away, get out of here? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, by the gods of the Philistines, by Dagon. They had multiple gods, Dagon being the fish god most popular, but he's basically cursing David by his gods. As one might do if you would maybe drive off someone that's attacking sheep with a stick. But David says this, and the Philistine first says unto David, he says, David, verse 44, come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. He's basically saying, you're just going to be buzzard bait. I'm going to kill you and leave you out here for the buzzard and the beast of the field. And David, verse 45, then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts. You know what that is? By the power. I come to you by the power of God. I come to you by the authority of God. The armies of Israel whom thou hast defied. And he says, this day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and will take thine head from thee. Pretty amazing statement considering he's got nothing but a sling and a stick. How's he going to do it? But he says he knows that somehow or another God has put this in his heart, that he's not only going to kill this man, but he says, I'm going to cut your head off. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air. He tells David, he says, I'm going to leave you for buzzard. He goes, no. Not only am I going to take your head off, and leave you. But the host of the Philistines are going to be left. The majority of the Philistines are going to be food for the birds and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. David had the whole armor of God. He was relying on that. And he says, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not by sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. You know, I'm certain that Goliath had thought, you know, he probably thought one day that he would die in battle. Any kind of a soldier like that. You know, George Patton was really upset that he didn't get to die in battle. You know, if you know anything about George Patton in history, when they took him out of command, when Eisenhower took him out of command, he was upset. And then he got in a car wreck and got some sort of infection and problems and died. And he really hated the fact the way he died, because he wanted to go out in glory. He wanted to go out in a battle. Being a tank commander, he wanted to die in battle. And he didn't. And you know that's kind of what Goliath thought. Goliath thought, you know, one day I'll probably die, but I'll die a glorious death in battle. And how did he die? A rock hit him. And then he got left out there, and there was no big celebration. There was no big monument. There was nothing to his, there's nothing that ever says this is where Goliath was buried, or this is what, nothing. He was left headless out there in a field for the animals to eat. And that's what happened to him. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and he took thence a stone and slang it. I don't know about you, but you know, Brother Green and I were trying to shoot some birds out of my property, you know, one day. And I was trying to outshoot him. You know, I couldn't let that old man outshoot me, you know. I got a scope like this, you know. And he's just using iron sights. And we're missing. We're missing and we're missing. And I'm like, maybe I need to steady myself on this tree, you know. And I'm trying to get steady as I can. And I finally got that bird, you know. And Brother Green was like, you got him. He was actually happy for me. I was happy for myself, too, that he didn't get it first. But that's, you know. But David is running. I'm standing still with a gun, and I'm just so, you know, it's hard to hold a gun still. It just is. And you know, I had to brace it. But I can't, you know, it's not like I'm standing still and you got it. David is on the move. He's running towards him, and you can see God in this, because there's no way that you could be that accurate without God being a predestinated rock in a predestinated place into his forehead. Put his hand in his bag, and he took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. I mean, knocked him a little for a loop. I don't think the stone killed him, but it was enough. It was enough to take him down. It was enough to make him fall, enough to make him go, ooh, what was that? You know, lose his balance, fall down, maybe on the ground sitting there going, man, that kid got me with something. Maybe he was out, but he wasn't necessarily dead. He smote him, and then David ran and stood upon the Philistine. Because it says, but there was no sword in David's hand in chapter 50. He slew him, there was no sword, and so David ran and stood upon the Philistine. Can you imagine that? I mean, we can't even imagine. This guy is down on the ground. Their army's like, what happened? Did he trip? Did he fall? I didn't see it. Did you see what happened? I mean, he's on the ground. This big guy, thud. And David runs up and climbs up on this guy. He's probably laying down, his chest is probably this tall. He's on his back, whether he's laying face down, and he grabs his sword, pulls this massive sword out. Massive sword. It's got to be a two-man thing, probably easy two-man for David, probably one man for a big hand like he had. But he takes it out and lops off his head. Now, all those watching, they pretty much know there's no way he's coming back. He's not going to stand up again. He's done. His head is cut off. And he cut off his head therewith, and when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And all the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines until they come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron, and the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sharman, even unto Gath and unto Ekron, and the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines. And what did they do? They went into all their tents and all their places and took everything that they had. They spoiled all their places, took everything that was there. And David took the head of the Philistines. That had to be something. I mean, I was carrying just a bucket of some debris cleaning up. You know, and when you're a kid, you know, I remember getting a 5-gallon bucket of water, and how heavy that was. But I can imagine that David's got this massive head. He's probably got his helmet maybe in one hand, and he's got this head of this man by the hair, carrying a head that he cut off, a massive head, and bringing that to Saul. At the end of this battle, he took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, put his armor in his tent. He took all of Saul's armor and put it in his tent, had that sword that he had for years. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? There's the indication that he really didn't know who was playing music for him. And Abner said, as thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. Abner didn't know who he was. And the king said, inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And David returned from the slaughter of the Philistines. Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. This had to be some kind of he just said, send him out. He goes out there, he wouldn't take his armor, and he says, I need to know who this man is, who this stripling is. And Abner finds him and brings him, and he brings him before Saul carrying this gruesome head of this giant of a man. And Saul said unto them, whose son art thou, young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. So clearly Saul didn't know who played music for him before. He just knew that there was a good young man down there that could play well on an instrument. But he knew him from this day forward. And from that day forward in chapter 18, it tells us that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. You know, it would have been easy for Jonathan to have been very jealous and say, I don't want this man taking over my future. I'm the son of the king. I'm the prince. But in this, too, there's a wonderful picture of the love of Jesus Christ, because Jonathan took off his own priestly robes. You know, David standing there wearing old shepherd's garments, covered with blood, dirty from a battle. And what does Jonathan do? Takes off his princely garments and puts them upon him. And then what he also does this, he gave him his sword and his bow and his girdle. Said, you take mine. He's saying that in chapter 18 and verse 4. But Jonathan was probably 5 or 10 years older, but had great admiration, great love for David, a love that couldn't be separated. They had tremendous friendship. And it says in verse 5, and David went in chapter 18, whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war. Now Abner was chief captain, but certainly David had a prominent place in the army of Saul. And he was accepted in the sight of all the people. You think about this, here's another reason why he was not 12, 13, 14-year-old boy. Because the men of war accepted him. They saw him as a young man that had great faith and leadership abilities, and he was accepted in the sight of all people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. He had great respect, and so quite amazing for such a stripling of a young man that David was. He had tremendous faith in God, and we need to understand the lesson there for us is that if God be with us, we can do great things. And we will face great trials and great troubles in life. And if we could say, our God is great, and that we don't need the things of this world because we have the sword of the Spirit. We have the helmet of salvation. We have the Word of God. We have all that we need to defeat our enemy. And so I pray that the Lord bless you from these things. Brother Kevin Cannon, would you dismiss us?